Welcome to the Lost Sci-Fi Story channel. If you're ready, let's begin today's story.
The Vethori's Promise had been sitting in Dock 9 for 6 hours by the time Davan Orell got to it, which was already 2 hours longer than he liked. Freight didn't improve with waiting. In his 11 years as a cargo inspector for the Interstellar Commerce Oversight Bureau, he had developed 2 firm professional beliefs: that a cold cup of synth coffee was a personal tragedy, and that any hauler that requested a delayed audit was a hauler with something worth finding. The Vethori's Promise had requested 3 delays. He had approved none of them. He stepped through the cargo bay's pressure seal with his scanner already running, the blue sweep of its reader painting slow arcs across the stacked containers. Bay 1 through Bay 6 were exactly what the manifest promised: polymer aggregate transit-sealed grain canisters, 3 pallets of medical equipment bound for the outer reach stations. All clean, all tedious, all the kind of cargo that made him wonder, briefly and not for the first time, whether he should have pursued a different career. He'd considered marine biology once, back at the academy. The oceans on Terath were apparently very calming. Bay 7 was not calming. The scanner caught it on the second pass, a biometric ghost, faint as a whisper, bleeding through the shielding of Crate 44C. The manifest listed it as salvaged reclamation materials, inert. He read that 3 times because inert was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. He ran the scan again. The reading came back the same, not 1 signature but 4, stacked in the crate's secondary chamber like books on a shelf, each one slow and shallow and sedated, but unmistakably, stubbornly alive. He stood there for a moment, holding his scanner, in the particular kind of silence that arrives when a situation reveals itself to be something much larger than the box it arrived in. Then he pulled up his emergency protocol display, a menu he had opened maybe twice in 11 years, and both times for hull pressure irregularities, and found, to his complete lack of surprise, that it offered him no specific guidance for this. It covered fire suppression, biological contamination, undeclared weapons-grade material, and for reasons he had never fully understood, a 6-step process for disputed grain certificates. He closed the menu. He hit the emergency release himself. The hiss of equalizing pressure filled the bay, and then the panel came open, and the cold, recycled air of the hidden compartment breathed out into the dock, and he saw them. 4 figures, folded into the gray dark of the chamber, each one held in place by restraints that were nothing like the crude cargo webbing he'd expected. These were engineered things, matte black cuffs locked around both wrists and both ankles, embedded with the kind of neural suppression nodes he'd only ever seen in security division documentation. The kind that didn't just hold a body in place. The kind that reasoned with the nervous system. 3 of the figures were already stirring at the edge of awareness, their breath shifting from slow to ragged as the pressure change reached them. The 4th was perfectly still. He went to her first, because stillness in a sedated person was the more urgent problem, and also because something about the quality of her stillness was different from the others. Not the inert stillness of deep sedation, but the particular stillness of a body that had reached some private equilibrium and was holding it deliberately, even unconscious. She looked almost human, almost in the way that clothes only counts in certain games. The geometry of her face was familiar: brow, cheekbone, jaw, but her hair moved without reason, each strand drifting in a slow, independent current that had nothing to do with the ventilation cycling through the bay. Along each finger from tip to wrist ran a line of faint bioluminescence, a pale cold blue against her skin, pulsing at the same interval as her heartbeat, and her wrists were chained. Davan Orell had a multi-tool on his belt. He had his scanner. He had 11 years of freight auditing experience, which had prepared him for a great many things, and he had, apparently, also had some baseline human wiring that looked at chains on a person's wrists and did not need to consult a protocol menu. He cut the restraints, all 4 of them, wrists and ankles both. Then he called the medical bay, crouched down beside her in the gray cold of the container, and waited with the specific feeling of a man who has just made a decision that is either entirely correct or the beginning of the worst week of his career, and cannot yet tell which. The medical bay of the Vethori's Promise had 2 beds, a diagnostic unit running firmware from 3 years ago, and a vending machine in the corner that offered nutrient supplements in flavors with names like citrus approximate and berry adjacent. Davan had eaten one once during a long overnight audit and had spent the following morning questioning a series of personal choices. He did not eat one now. He sat in the chair beside the bed, filled out his incident report on a tablet that kept autocorrecting neural suppression cuffs to neutral suppression cups, and waited. The other 3 had been seen, logged, and transferred to the station's emergency intake, conscious enough to walk, frightened enough to say very little, processed into the system that would, slowly and imperfectly, attempt to figure out what to do with them. She was the last one, and she had not yet moved. He was on his 4th page of the report when she did. It wasn't gradual. There was no cinematic flicker of eyelids, no slow return from a great distance. One moment she was still, and the next her eyes were open, fully, immediately open, irises the color of still water, silver and depthless. And she was already pushing herself upright with the careful precision of someone running a full systems check on their own body, joint by joint, testing each one before trusting it with weight. Davan opened his mouth. He had prepared something reasonable to say, something calm, something that started with you're safe and moved toward you on a freight vessel and arrived, eventually, at there are some questions I need to ask you when you're ready. He had the whole sequence mapped out. He got approximately 1 syllable into it. She looked down at her wrists. He watched her face do something that he did not have the correct vocabulary for. It wasn't panic exactly, but it was the thing that lived just beneath panic, the cold and immediate recognition of a specific kind of danger that she understood in a way he did not yet. Her eyes shifted. The silver bled away and something amber moved in underneath it, deep and urgent, and she reached across the bed and grabbed his forearm with both hands before he had finished processing that she was sitting up. The restraints, she said. Her voice was not groggy. It was not confused. It was the voice of someone whose cognition had come back online all at once, like a ship's systems powering up in sequence and arriving immediately at combat ready. You need to put them back, right now. Where are they? Do you still have them? Davan looked at the sealed evidence bag in the corner of the room, where the neural cuffs were sitting, because they were evidence of a crime, and evidence of crimes was supposed to be preserved, and not, specifically, reattached to the person they had been removed from. He explained this. He used what he considered a reasonable tone. He mentioned the words legal process and your safety, and the Bureau will need to. Her eyes went the color of burning copper. You don't understand what you've done, she said, and the sentence landed not like an accusation but like a fact being placed carefully on a table between them, something heavy that needed to be handled correctly. How long have I been without them? He checked his tablet. About 2 hours. She closed her eyes. The bioluminescent lines on her fingers pulsed once, a single, slow beat, brighter than it had been, then dimmer. And she breathed out through her nose in the way that people breathe when they are doing arithmetic that they already know the answer to and do not want to be right about. 2 hours, she said to no one in particular. Is that bad? She opened her eyes. The amber had settled into something steadier now, the color of old candlelight, which he was learning meant something different from the copper, though he could not yet have explained exactly what. In Keth law, she said, an unrestrained debtor who is absent from their registered location for more than 90 minutes without documented authorization can be declared absent under bond. My creditor will have filed that declaration the moment he realized I was missing. He is a very thorough man. She paused. He keeps an automated alert on my registry signal. He would have noticed within minutes. And absent under bond means. It means, she said, with the patience of someone explaining something to a person who is trying very hard but working with incomplete information, that I am no longer a bonded servant who has been illegally transported. I am now escaped property. Those are not the same legal category. They are not even in the same legal building. Davan put his tablet down. Someone smuggled you in a cargo crate. Yes. In neural suppression restraints. Yes. Sedated. Quite heavily, yes. Thank you for the recap. And the problem, he said slowly, is that I cut the chains. She looked at him with the particular expression of someone who has just watched another person arrive, by their own route, and at some personal cost, at a conclusion she had been standing at for the last 4 minutes. The problem, she said, is that the chains were the only thing that proved I was accounted for. Without them, I am not a freed person. I am a discrepancy. And in Keth law, a discrepancy that used to be bonded property is classified as. She stopped. She seemed to be selecting the most accurate word from a range of options, none of which she appeared to enjoy. Theft, she said finally, of itself, from its creditor. The vending machine in the corner made a soft mechanical sound and dispensed an unsolicited nutrient bar onto the floor. Neither of them looked at it. I was trying to help, Davan said, because it seemed important to establish this, even if it was not currently useful information. I know, she said. Her voice had lost its urgency, which was somehow worse. Urgency implied a problem that could still be outrun. What replaced it was something quieter and much heavier. You looked at the chains and you saw cruelty. I understand that. Where you come from, that is the correct interpretation. She looked down at her hands, at the pale blue lines tracing each finger to the wrist, still glowing faintly in the medical bay's light. Where I come from, the chains were the only document I had that said I was allowed to exist inside the system. And you have just, she said, with a precision that was worse than anger, removed my documentation. He asked her to start from the beginning. She said that the beginning was 11,000 years ago, which was not helpful, so he asked her to start from a beginning that was relevant to the current situation, and she said she would do her best, but that he should understand that the current situation had roots, and that cutting the roots off a thing did not mean they weren't there. Davan pulled his chair a few inches closer to the bed, put his tablet face down on the floor, and folded his hands in his lap in the manner of a man who has decided that note-taking would be beside the point. The Keth, she told him, had achieved faster-than-light travel 400 years ago. They had built 11 orbital stations, pioneered quantum biological architecture, and developed a legal system so exhaustively detailed that it had its own subfield of mathematics dedicated purely to resolving disputes that arose within it. They were not, she was careful to say, a primitive civilization. They were not cruel in the way that implied thoughtlessness. They were cruel in the far more durable way, the way that looked, from the inside, like order. When a Keth family incurred a debt they could not pay, the debt did not simply sit there gathering interest and generating increasingly firm correspondence. It generated an obligation that the law treated as a form of labor contract, binding, heritable, and enforceable at the physical level. The debtor's labor, their time, their skills, their body's productive hours became the legal property of the creditor until the balance was cleared. This was called a bond. The bond was registered in the central ledger, documented with biometric identifiers, and physically marked on the debtor's skin at the registration ceremony. She held up her hands. The lines on her fingers were still glowing, faint, and patient. The neural suppression cuffs, she continued, were not a punishment. They were a permit. They broadcast the debtor's registry code to every Keth legal scanner within 100 meters, a continuous transmission that said, "This person is accounted for. This person is documented. This person's presence in the world is authorized." Without that broadcast, she did not become an unauthorized person in any minor administrative sense. She became, specifically and legally, property that had separated itself from its owner, which the Keth legal code classified under the same statute as theft, fraud, and 3 categories of financial sabotage she did not have translations for. "Your parents," Davan said. He said it carefully, because it was the part of what she had told him earlier that he had been turning over since she said it. The way you turn over something sharp to understand which edge is the dangerous one. "My parents," she said, "were doctors. They ran a small practice on the 4th orbital station. They were very good at what they did and very poor at what they charged for it, which is a combination that ends predictably." She said it without bitterness, which was worse than bitterness would have been. "They died when I was 16. A transit accident, nothing remarkable. What they left me was a practice I couldn't run, equipment I couldn't maintain, and 412,000 credits of medical supply debt that the bond office converted to a registered obligation within 30 days of the estate filing." She paused. "I have been bonded for 9 years. The debt with accumulated service fees is now 630,000 credits. It was 412 when I started." Davan did the arithmetic silently, which was the only appropriate way to do it. "It's getting larger. The service fees compound," she said, with the particular flatness of someone who has explained this before and found that the explaining does not change it. "This is considered standard practice." He stopped. He had 17 words ready to follow that sentence, all of them accurate and none of them useful to her. "Yes," she said, sparing him the trouble of choosing one. "It is." He stood up, because sitting had started to feel inadequate to the information he was holding. He walked to the porthole and looked at nothing in particular, the gray drift of dock infrastructure, a supply drone making its slow transit between berths, and he thought about chains, about the difference between what a thing looked like and what a thing was, about his own hands cutting restraints from a stranger's wrists in the cold of a cargo hold, certain, absolutely certain, that he was doing the right thing, because that was what a person did when they found someone in chains. You removed the chains, that was the logic. It was so clean it hadn't required a second thought. He turned back to her. "The man who was transporting you, the buyer. He purchased my bond from my original creditor 3 weeks ago." The transaction was registered in the ledger. She stopped. Something moved across her face. "Actually," she said more slowly, "I don't know whether it was." "What do you mean?" "A bond sale requires filing in the central ledger to be legally complete. My original creditor arranged the transport quickly. I was sedated before I could confirm any documentation." She looked at her hands again. "If the sale wasn't registered before your bureau intercepted this ship, then legally I was still bonded to my original creditor when you removed the cuffs, which means the absence declaration he filed is valid. Which means I am currently," she went very still, "which means you're currently what?" She looked up at him, and her eyes were the deep, burnt amber of someone standing at the edge of a calculation whose result they have just arrived at and do not yet know what to do with. "Currently," she said, "a capital offense in 3 jurisdictions." From the corner, with extraordinary timing, the vending machine hummed to life and dispensed a second nutrient bar. It landed on top of the first one with a small, definitive click. Davan looked at it. "Is that supposed to mean something?" "I have no idea," she said, "but I am choosing to interpret it as sympathy." He spent the first hour trying to reach the Bureau's legal division, which was, in his experience, less a division and more a philosophical position, a belief held by certain people in a distant office that problems, if left on hold long enough, would eventually resolve themselves out of exhaustion. The automated system informed him that his estimated wait time was 22 minutes, then 40, then informed him that due to high volume his call would be returned within 2 working days, then disconnected. He called back. The automated system greeted him like they had never met. Vale watched him from the bed with the expression of someone who had spent 9 years inside bureaucratic systems and had long since made her peace with the fact that they were not designed to be navigated quickly by people who needed them most. When he finally reached a human being in the legal division, a tired-sounding man named Specialist Orell, who spoke with the resigned energy of someone 3 hours past the end of his shift. Davan laid out the situation in precise and careful order. The smuggling, the restraints, the neural suppression cuffs now sitting in an evidence bag, the Keth bond system, the absence declaration, the capital classification. Specialist Orell listened to all of it, typed something, and then told him about the Interstellar Displaced Persons Compact, which was a treaty that had been protecting persecuted beings for 60 years, and which required a minimum of 10 working days to process, and during which the applicant would need to remain in a registered holding facility for documentation purposes. Davan asked whether a registered holding facility would satisfy Keth legal requirements as a substitute for bond restraints. There was a pause. "That's not something I can assess from this office," Specialist Orell said. "You'd need to submit a cross-jurisdictional compatibility inquiry, which takes—" "How long?" Another pause, longer this time, with the quality of a man checking a number he already knows and does not want to say out loud. 30 working days. Davan thanked him. He did not mean it. He filed the compact application anyway, because it was the correct thing to do and because doing nothing while waiting for better options was the kind of decision he had already made once today and did not intend to repeat. Then he sat down on the floor of the medical bay. The chair had started to feel like a decision, and the floor felt more honest. And he opened a new report on his tablet, which autocorrected the header to Interstellar Commerce Blight Bureau, and then seemed to reconsider and left it alone. It was 3 in the morning when the terminal on the wall chimed. Vale crossed the room before he had finished standing, and she read the incoming transmission with the focused stillness of someone who had learned to process legal documents the way other people process threats. Quickly, completely, looking first for what was missing rather than what was there. Her eyes moved through it twice. Then she turned around, and her irises were doing something he hadn't seen before, cycling, silver to amber to a brief and startled green, before settling at last into a pale and careful blue, the color of something fragile that was trying to decide whether it was allowed to hold. "The buyer registered the bond sale," she said, 6 hours ago. He filed in a panic when the Bureau intercepted the ship. He was trying to establish legal ownership before the cargo audit concluded." She stopped. "The registration timestamp predates my original creditor's absence declaration by 4 hours. Under Keth law, the declaration was filed against a bond that had already been transferred. It has no legal standing." "So you're not a capital offense," Davan said. "I am not a capital offense," she confirmed, and the way she said it, not with relief exactly, but with the particular quiet of someone setting down something very heavy after a very long time, made the sentence feel larger than its words. He exhaled. He had not been aware of how much air he'd been holding. "I am, however," she continued, "because Vale Sarath was constitutionally incapable of leaving a complete picture incomplete, still bonded to a man who arranged my transport in a smuggling container and does not currently know which bureau facility I'm in, so I would describe my situation as improved rather than resolved." She paused, "But I have survived 9 years of unresolved. I know what to do with it." He nodded. Then he picked up his tablet and opened a third document, one he had been composing in pieces at the back of his mind for the last several hours, assembling it the way you assemble a case, carefully, with evidence, with the awareness that it would move slowly, and that slow was not the same as never. He filed it to the Interstellar Commerce Oversight Bureau's Anti-Trafficking Division. A full report on the Keth bond system, its inheritance mechanism, its compounding service fees, its use of neural suppression technology as documentation rather than punishment. He flagged it for review under 3 separate statutes. He attached everything, his scan records, the restraint analysis, her biometric registry data, all of it. He submitted it, and then he sat with the knowledge that it would take months, possibly years, and might accomplish nothing in any time frame that mattered to her specifically. "You filed something else," she said. She had been watching him. Her eyes were still that careful blue. A report to the anti-trafficking division about the bond system. He put the tablet down. It won't help you, not directly, not soon. She was quiet for a moment. The bioluminescent lines on her fingers pulsed their slow, patient pulse. The same rhythm they'd held since the cargo hold. The same rhythm they'd held for 9 years. Her registry, her documentation, her proof that she was someone's property. He had stopped seeing them as something strange. He had started seeing them as what they were, a mark put on a child by a system that needed somewhere to put its accounting, because the alternative was absorbing a loss, and systems did not absorb losses. They redistributed them downward until they found someone with no further down to go. My parents were good doctors, she said, not for the first time, but differently this time. Not as fact, but as something she was choosing to say out loud in this room to this specific person. They believed that was enough, that being good at the right thing would protect them from the wrong outcomes. She looked at him. I used to believe that was naive. Now I think they just didn't know which systems they were standing inside of until the systems closed. I didn't know either, Davan said. I cut the chains because I thought that was the whole problem. I thought I understood the situation from the outside. You understood what you could see. That's not understanding, that's just looking. She considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then something in her expression shifted, the careful blue warming, fractionally, toward something less guarded, and she said, "For a cargo inspector, that is a more sophisticated epistemological distinction than I expected. I have 11 years of freight auditing and a lot of time to think," he said. "Also, the vending machine has been educating me." They both looked at the corner. The vending machine sat in dignified silence, its 2 dispensed nutrient bars still on the floor where they had fallen, uncollected, throughout the entire night. It had not produced a third. It seemed to understand that the moment did not require commentary. Outside the porthole, the dock lights had shifted from the blue of night operations to the pale yellow of early cycle. The station's artificial morning, reliable and indifferent, arriving on schedule regardless of what had happened in the rooms it illuminated. The Vethori's promise was still in Dock 9. It would be impounded by end of day. Its crew would spend a long time in small rooms answering questions from people with tablets. Davan Orell would file 7 more reports before his shift ended. 3 of them would go nowhere. 2 of them would be acknowledged and archived and never opened again. One would be passed to a senior investigator who had, for 4 years, been building a broader case involving Keth commercial shipping routes and their intersection with bonded labor transport. And that investigator would send Davan a brief and professional message saying only, "This is useful, thank you," and Davan would read it twice and feel the specific, imperfect satisfaction of a small thing done correctly inside a large thing that was still wrong. The last report he filed that morning was the simplest. A 1-page amendment to the cargo audit record for Bay 7, Crate 44C, correcting the manifest classification from salvaged reclamation materials, inert to its accurate description. He spent longer than necessary on the wording. He wanted it to be precise. He wanted anyone who read it, in any office, in any year, to understand exactly what had been in that crate, and exactly what the word inert had been asked to carry. Vale read it over his shoulder when he was done, without asking permission, which he did not mind. "It's accurate," she said. "That was the intention." She straightened up and looked at the porthole, at the yellow light coming in, at whatever she was calculating in the private space behind her shifting eyes. The bioluminescent lines on her fingers caught the light and held it. Her hair moved in its quiet, independent drift. She looked like someone who had been handed back a version of her life that was smaller and stranger than the one she deserved, and had decided, with full awareness of that fact, to carry it forward anyway. "What happens to me now," she said, "is still largely terrible." "I know," he said, "but less terrible than it was at 2 this morning." "Measurably," he agreed. She nodded once. with the gravity of someone ratifying a difficult treaty, and then she picked up one of the nutrient bars from the floor, read the label "berry adjacent," and looked at him with an expression that managed to contain, simultaneously, suffering and the faintest possible edge of amusement. "Is all human food named like this?" "Only the kind that's trying its best," he said. She opened it. She ate it in the pale, artificial morning,